back as we begin this final segment of the 20th edition of the Doha Forum. Our next segment is a Newsmaker Interview. The president of his country has attempted to mediate the conflict over Ukraine while facing an electoral contest with the rise of the far right, a withdrawal of troops from Mali, an overt crisis with Algeria, and ambivalent relations with the United States following a diplomatic fallout over strategic nuclear submarines. It is my pleasure now to invite to the stage France's Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, who will be joined by CNN's Becky Anderson. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody. It's wonderful to be here as we close out what has been a super couple of days. I think you'll all agree. I'm absolutely delighted to be interviewing the French Foreign Minister. An extremely important opportunity for all of us, I think, to get a sense of specifically what has been going on with regard to the French involvement in mediation efforts on the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and where our esteemed friend here believes that we will go going forward. So I think we're just going to dive in, sir, if that's okay. I'm going to kick off with an on-the-ground question before we back out and talk about the kind of wider picture here. I think it's important news coming in that the French president will be speaking with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, to discuss the terms and conditions of an exceptional humanitarian operation to evacuate civilians in Mariupol. There couldn't be anything more important. I think we will all agree. I know you'll have all watched the news. Mariupol has been an absolute devastating disaster for the people of Ukraine. And I think it's just important if you can just fill us in on exactly what that operation would look like and where we are at, sir, and then we'll back out and get a wider conversation going. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much for welcoming me. I first of all wanted to say that this is the 24th time that as Minister of the French Republic I've come to Qatar. This shows the strength of our relations and their diversity, but also very often the convergences that we have together in the assessment and action at the international level. And before I come back to your question, Madam, I also wanted to say that I'm extremely careful about the agility and the creativity of Qatar's diplomacy in this period under the authority of His Highness Emir Tamim and with the activity of my colleague Sheikh Mohammed. I appreciated that, particularly during the Afghan crisis, where we could see for ourselves the important diplomatic efforts undertaken by the Emirates, and also having had very strong collaboration to enable our own fellow citizens, but also Afghan people who were threatened, allowing them to come to Europe and France in particular. So I wanted to pay tribute and saying that I particularly appreciate these days the efforts made by Qatar's diplomacy vis-à-vis the possibility of signing the JCPOA agreement, and I know that you talked about it, and which is now truly on the table, and I know how determined you are to be able to try and find a major agreement for the region. And also for the efforts that you've undertaken regarding the developments in the situation in Chad. And here in Doha, you're welcome. You'll host a preparatory conference for the transition in N'Djamena, and all of that is going smoothly. So I welcome Qatar's agility in diplomacy and action, and I thank you for this deep trust between us. I won't dwell on what's going to happen in Mariupol. First of all, because it's not happening here, and it needs to happen in the best conditions of security and discretion, and you can see that Mariupol is a second Aleppo, and I hope with collective guilt if we do not do anything. Mariupol is siege warfare in which Russia has embarked for a month. Maybe it didn't consider siege warfare, but now this is siege warfare, and Mariupol is the most striking example. Siege warfare is a horrible kind of war because civilian populations are slaughtered, annihilated, suffering is horrible. And the duration of siege wars is quite impressive. So this is exhausting fighting, and this results in unbearable tragedies and suffering, hence the necessity of making sure that there is at least one moment when civilian populations can breathe, and this is what the French President of the Republic is striving to do, but players on the ground need to impose a ceasefire starting with the aggressor, because there is an aggressor in all that story. There is an invading power, which, to reach its own ends, is taking a population hostage in Mariupol. This is truly unacceptable.
I want to drill down on France's role. President Macron speaks frequently with his Russian and Ukrainian counterparts. After his last call last week, he says he does not see that there is an agreement inside for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Why, sir? What do you understand to be the reason for President Macron's position there? And does President Macron, who has a relationship with President Putin, which has allowed him to have made these significant efforts to try and mediate a result to this, does President Macron trust President Putin at this point?
This Ukrainian tragedy goes a long way in history, and France was a stakeholder, as you know, in what was called the Normandy format, which was established in 2014-2015, the aim of which was to exit the crisis in the eastern part of Ukraine. France had been a stakeholder since the Minsk Accord, and I was on these negotiations myself, and we tried to make sure that the central elements of the Minsk Accord could be put in place. At some point there was hope in December 2019 when, after President Zelensky was elected, it was considered that paths were opened to result in a peaceful and political solution to the situation in Donbass. Unfortunately, this didn't happen, and it's not for lack of trying. Several times President Macron asked for the Normandy format to meet even at the highest level in order to result in concrete and acceptable solutions that would guarantee Ukraine's integrity and sovereignty. This didn't take place. And then there was what you are aware of, both the enlargement of the Ukrainian conflict to issues of security and stability because of the decisions made by President Putin last December, asking the US government and NATO about rules and regulations in Europe, and the willpower, the willingness to talk about issues of sovereignty, and provided that you have the right forum and you come there without any hidden agenda, and then the brutality of the 24 February situation, the diplomatic brutality, and then military brutality. And before I answer your question about President Macron's action, what seems to me to be the most dramatic in political and diplomatic terms after 1 month of conflict, which was truly well identified during the meetings that took place in Brussels last week, both the NATO summit, the G7 meeting, and the European Council meeting, particularly focused on the Ukrainian issue. On 3 different topics, President Putin had the opposite effect of what he was seeking, of what he thought he would find. First on Ukraine. He thought there was a form of fragility, probably looking at the footage from his arrival in Crimea under enthusiastic cheers in 2014, and he thought that at least in the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, the welcome would have been the same, and that he himself was expected there to assert a Russian-speaking identity, a specific Russian identity in this Ukrainian space. Maybe even in Ukraine he thought that mere Russian presence, because of alliances or complicitness, even financial complicitness, that this would provide a rift in the organization of the state, and it's exactly the opposite that happened. In a way, President Putin has contributed to creating Ukraine, creating a nation, solidifying it, unifying it, giving it pride. Because what has been clear since the beginning of this military crisis is also this, the strength of the resistance. You heard President Zelensky, I know, at the beginning of this Doha forum, the strength of the resistance embodied by President Zelensky, but behind him a whole people resisting and asserting its own sovereignty. Secondly, he could have thought that European democracies collectively were weak, and that they were not going to succeed in having the appropriate response to this aggression, and that solidarity with Ukraine would be variable in its reach. And so if there were sanctions that were adopted, they would have been small because Europeans would have not been able to find an agreement between them. Exactly the opposite has happened. Never before has the European Union been so determined in its response, so swift in its response, so united in its response, so strong in its proposals as well. Reaching as far as huge issues, which are the claim, the statement during the Versailles European Council, claiming that we could have the right means to ensure Europe's energy sovereignty. So total failure, even on energy, because even a short-term objective to reduce by 2/3 energy dependency by year-end and reach full energy, organized, systemic energy autonomy by 2027. This is the opposite of what he was looking for. And at the same time, the transatlantic alliance is now re-energized. We had questions about its future we had questions about whether it was an instrument of the past, and itself was wondering about its own missions, sometimes did not complying with the substantive mission that it had when it was created, this alliance, i.e. security of the transatlantic space and none other, but also something that would be strong because of solidarity, but also defensive and not offensive. And you have these principles again. So now the outcomes are exactly the opposite of what President Putin was looking for. I'm sorry if it was a bit lengthy, and I haven't even answered your question.
I wouldn't expect you to answer my question, sir. I do want you to be very specific when you answer this question. I've heard everything that you've just said, and I hear your confidence about what was achieved last week. Joe Biden, the US president, was in Brussels. He then went on to Poland, made a big speech in Warsaw. And at the end of that speech, he said that Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. Now, the White House has walked that back. They've said that he wasn't talking about regime change. Be that as it may, the US president says openly in a speech in Warsaw that Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. What was your response to that? And what sort of impact do you think that might have going forward?
Well, I'm not speaking on behalf of President Biden, but on these matters I can speak on behalf of President Macron. And in a certain way, I'm going to answer with the question that you asked earlier. We need to carry on speaking with the Russians. We need to go on speaking with President Putin, because it's precisely because he's not reaching the expected outcome that I described earlier. It's because of that we need to demand dialogue and engagement, clearly without any naivete, with a lot of firmness, but go on speaking so that at some point he'll consider that the price to pay for his intervention in Ukraine is so high that it's better to negotiate. And then there would be a vector for opening up discussions. There would be someone to speak to, someone who could achieve that. And this is what the President has been working on, President Macron. He's doing that because he represents France, because there's history, because there's been a previous relationship with President Putin, also because France is a member of the Security Council, and in this quality it has a responsibility, but also because France has the presidency of the European Union, so it has an extra responsibility. Now we know the scope, the discussion topics that are going to be on the table inevitably, which are both Ukraine's neutrality question mark. What about neutrality if it's, well, President Zelensky has opened up possibilities and guarantees for Ukraine's security, the level of militarization of this country, and also the matter of territories, both the issue of Crimea, but also Luhansk and Donetsk. We know what the topics are. Now we need to talk about them, and the best way to talk about them is to have a ceasefire. You never speak seriously with a gun to your head, and this is why, especially with Mariupol, President Macron has asked for the conditions to be met for ceasefire to open up negotiations. Ceasefire means stopping. That doesn't mean the end of negotiations. It's the beginning of negotiations without the people suffering.
Just a little more specific then, with respect. Do you agree with Joe Biden, the US president, when he says that President Putin cannot stay in power?
No, I said that I was not the spokesperson for President Biden, and I shall leave it at that. What I'm simply saying is that what we need to do is get ways and means for negotiation with Russia, and this is for this reason that President Macron is still talking with President Putin to reach conditions first for a ceasefire and then for negotiation.
Are you aware of how Emmanuel Macron responded to that speech by Joe Biden?
I have no comments to make about this.
Didn't think you would. With that, our time is up. Would you, I know you started with a message to our hosts here, which I think was an extremely important message, and I applaud you for doing that. I applaud the words from the French Foreign Minister. I thank you for hosting me here, and I know that the audience has had a terrific time over the last couple of weeks. I know that we're not quite at the end of this, but I know that this panel, this session, this one-on-one with the Foreign Minister is very much part of the closing panel. With that, sir, a closing thought from you?
Well, I think that we're at a tipping point where beyond the Ukrainian crisis, the parameters of stability and security in Europe are challenged. And beyond that, of course, risks of global destabilization. Of all the points of all the pillars that the international community has tried to live on since the end of the Second World War. This is a crisis that affects us all in our security, and it's very good that this Doha Forum was able to table this matter in a very clear and peaceful
well said.
way.
The French Foreign Minister, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Le Drian. Thanks again, Becky Anderson, for that interview. As we move into our final panel discussions of this 20th edition of the Doha Forum, which focuses on the prospects for global cooperation in an increasingly polarized world. Judging by the current geopolitical tensions, as you just heard, the acute crisis, the tensions among major powers, I'm very tempted to suggest that the next panel has an almost impossible mission, and that it could be a very short discussion, but I won't. It's a pleasure to invite to the stage the panelists, Miguel Angel Moratinos, the High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, Mary Robinson, the Chair of the Elders, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, President of Ireland between 1990 and 1997, and someone I had the pleasure to interview at the Presidential Palace in Dublin back then, as well as Ambassador Collen Vixen Kelapile, the permanent representative of Botswana to the United Nations and the President of the Economic and Social Council for 2022, Catherine Russell, the newly appointed Executive Director of UNICEF, and Zeid Hussein, President of the International Peace Institute and the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Of course, moderating this session will be Robin Niblett, Director of Chatham House. Welcome to you both. Or welcome to you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to crack straight on. It's at the very end of this Doha Forum closing panel. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate it. I'm Robin Niblett, the Director of Chatham House. We're delighted to be one of the strategic partners with the Doha Forum. On behalf of my colleagues, Lina Khatib, Sanam Vakil, others who've been helping run some of the and convene some of the sessions here, along with the other many institutions that are partners. It's great to have this opportunity to close out over 45 minutes. And as you can see, we've got a fantastic panel who are going to be very disciplined in their use of time so that we can get all of their viewpoints in and also have an opportunity to reach out to you. We want to try and leave 10 minutes or so to get some questions from the floor, from other participants at this important forum. So do think up if you have a question or two that you would like to pose. We'd love to be able to hear them. The title of this final session is Prospects for Global Cooperation in a Polarized World. So that's a pretty big phrase, but I think it actually captures one of the most important challenges facing the world today. What we've seen, I noted that we are pretty much halfway towards the Sustainable Development Goals, set in 2015, meant to be achieved by 2030. And certainly, probably 5 years into them, there was a sense we were going in the right direction, heading towards achieving them. But it's been a really difficult last few years. The sense that the accelerating process of climate change was starting to undermine the ability to achieve it. Then the hit of the COVID pandemic, which impacted many of the poorest in the world, the most, poorest inside countries, poorest between countries. And then just as we were starting to maybe emerge from the pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has compounded not just obviously the suffering of people in Ukraine, but beyond it as well, as we've seen commodity prices rise, in particular food prices rise, interest rates rise, the world's attention on the SDGs in those parts of the world decline, and maybe equally importantly, the structure of multilateral cooperation, which so many on this panel have first-hand experience of, potentially being ripped apart, and the emergence of 2 camps, 3 camps. I'll let people talk about what they see here, but whatever it isn't the multilateral world that helps deliver that more just future for the world that I think everyone here is committed to. So I'm going to ask a very simple opening question to each of the panelists here, and I will introduce them literally not all in one go, but as I turn to them, because you've got their bios on your forum packs, on your iPhones or your Android phones or whatever you've got in front of you. But what I'm going to ask them is a first simple question, which is going to be, how do you see the war in Ukraine and the West's response impacting prospects for international stability and global development? And then we'll have a second round with them to ask, what are their answers? So please don't give me your answers at the beginning. We want to understand how you see, what is your top 1 or 2 worries with the kind of experience you bring. Then we'll get some answers, and then I'm going to turn to you to get some additional comments or questions, and we'll give a final round to our great panelists. So I'm going in alphabetical order of first name, because it's quickest. Cathy Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, in the Biden White House until, gosh, a month ago, I think, yeah. But somebody, therefore, has had a lot of experience on promoting the global women's issue agenda for the Biden administration, sorry, for the Obama administration, and made an ambassador for that role. Cathy, what are your biggest 2 or 3 worries right now? Maybe looking from your current seat, but from your previous responsibility as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Robin. I think my biggest worry is probably always the same, which is that every major conflict, whether it's COVID, climate, or just military conflicts, they always affect the most vulnerable. That's certainly the case here in Ukraine, where we see almost 2 million children affected, have left the country, affected by this conflict in very direct ways. Excuse me, and it's always the most vulnerable, whether it's women, children, who are affected by things like this. And you know, there's no simple answer to it. You know, obviously UNICEF and the multilateral agencies, countries are providing all sorts of aid, but that's not really a solution. The solution and the only answer for children is peace. And unfortunately, we don't have peace. And until this insanity stops over there, it's not going to be the case that we have a world where these children can have security, where they can get an education, where they can get, you know, nutritious meals and things like that, where they can live peacefully. And unfortunately, the big problem for us is that all the attention now is on Ukraine, as you know, as rightfully so in a way, but there are so many other places where there are huge challenges. Afghanistan, where I was a couple of weeks ago, and where, you know, we're estimating that 95% of the country is living below the poverty line right now, and there's serious acute malnutrition going on there. And I literally saw babies who are on the verge of starvation. You know, we see conflicts still going on in Syria and other places around the world. Those countries still need help, and they're not they're not in the public eye. Yemen, other places where we still need assistance, and that's not getting the attention that it should because of what's happening in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Kathy. You've put both the issue and you've noted a couple of other big conflicts where there's terrible deprivation right now. Afghanistan, I suppose you could add Yemen. I mean, there's a whole list we could come to, and they're off the news, certainly in Western governments. Let me turn now to Ambassador Collen Kelapile, who is the permanent representative of Botswana to the UN, and for 2022, the president of ECOSOC, the UN Economic and Social Council. Collen, if I could turn to you with your, maybe either your ECOSOC hat on or that perspective from Botswana, how do you see this conflict spilling over into the priority issues for you?
No, thank you very much, Robin, for this opportunity. Let me start by saying Catherine's concern is also my concern, for the very reason that UNICEF is part of the ECOSOC system. So one of our key focus areas is exactly the mandate of UNICEF. But broadly, let me say that you summed up my real concern in your own intervention. ECOSOC is the platform that is entrusted the responsibility to supervise the development agenda. The 2030 agenda and the 17 goals under the oversight of ECOSOC. My main worry is therefore obviously that the conflict in Ukraine might slow us even further, given exactly what you said, that we are only 8 years before the decade of action, and we had already suffered a lot of derailment. We have been delayed significantly by COVID-19. The financing of the development agenda has already been impacted by COVID-19. As we know, even before entering the pandemic, the financing gap for the SDGs had already been very wide. So my worry is that anything in addition to that, especially the conflict in Ukraine, might relegate the development agenda to the back seat. So many vulnerable groups and countries might be left further behind. We just adopted the Doha Program of Action on 17th of March, which makes commitments by the international community to ensure that the least developed countries are not left further behind. So my worry, beyond the larger membership of the UN, the developing countries, is that we are at the risk of leaving behind even furthest the least developed countries, the small island developing countries, and the landlocked developing countries, which are countries in special situations. So I would leave it at there to say that both implementation and financing of the agenda is my main worry if the conflict in Ukraine distract attention to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Again, a very clear set of concerns and worries. You talked about financing, but you talked also about implementation and the capacity for that. Gianni Infantino, known, I'm sure, to everyone here, especially in Doha right now, President of FIFA, formerly Secretary General of UEFA. Sport has been one of those issues where cooperation always continued. Well, not always, but there have been exceptional moments in the past, and I'm wondering how you see it, especially in the lead-up to this World Cup, spilling over. And yeah, I'm not going to define your worry. You must have plenty of your own. Why don't you tell us how you see this thing spilling over into your world?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, hello everybody, and many thanks to Doha, to Qatar, to the organizer of this fantastic event here. Obviously, what is happening right now is terrible and has an impact on football, on soccer, on sports. In general, sports and football in particular should be about inclusion, about uniting people, about bringing people together. And obviously the consequences are that teams cannot play, not participate in competitions. But I think as a citizen of the world today, this is probably the least of our worries. We have to think about the people who suffer, as Ms. Russell was saying as well, in other parts of the world, conflicts that exist. As president of FIFA, we are confronted with conflicts in different parts of the world, and we need to try to help in all of these conflicts in the best way possible. Nelson Mandela was saying that sport has the power to change the world. And I think we all agree that Mandela was one of the persons, maybe one of the few persons, maybe together with Gandhi and some others, who achieved something incredible for humanity in the last century. How did he do it? Well, with a peaceful process, with an inclusive process, not with the escalation of aggression, of violence, but with trying to bring dialogue together. So I was very happy to hear Minister Le Drian recently speaking about dialogue, about bringing people together. That's what sport has to do as well, because we cannot afford, I think, further divisions. We have to learn as well, probably, to live together, and maybe that's, again, maybe that sport and football in particular can help, and maybe we have the chance to speak about it when we speak about the World Cup and bringing everyone indeed again together.
As you've taken the opportunity to talk about what can be positive about sport, I'll let you think about the tough question I might ask you in the second round, which is about national teams in this current environment versus, let's call them, club teams, and whether that separation can take place or not. But I'll let you think about that, because I know you're in a very complex position. Mary Robinson, Chair of the Elders, former President of Ireland, former UN Commissioner for Human Rights, and importantly maybe for this conference, because we haven't had a chance to talk about it as much yet on the panel, also former Special Envoy for Climate Change in the lead up to the Paris COP21 successful agreement. Mary, what's on your top list of worries?
Well, as you know, Robin, I'm passionate about climate justice, and the invasion of Ukraine is going to aggravate, and is already aggravating, all the existing inequalities and injustices. And I want to really particularly focus on the injustices of climate change, because it's not a neutral issue, it's a justice issue. And there are layers of injustice involved in it. The first is that climate change disproportionately and much earlier affects the poorest countries, poorest communities, small island states and indigenous peoples, who happen to be the black and brown and indigenous peoples of our world. So it's also a racial injustice, and they're not responsible. It's the industrialized world that is responsible. Secondly, there's a gender dimension. Women have different social roles, different power, sometimes different land rights, like land rights, but they have to put food on the table. They have to go further in drought for firewood or for water, etc. Thirdly, the intergenerational injustice, and thank goodness that school children and young people are calling us out for not taking the steps we need to take. And fourthly, the injustice of the different pathways to development. Industrialized countries, we built our economies on fossil fuel, and we have to wean ourselves off now with just transition for the workers and communities affected. And a transition out of fossil fuel, a transition into clean energy, and both must be a just transition. And the fifth is the injustice to nature herself. These were already a problem, and then we got COVID. And the rich world did not share the vaccines. We had the inequitable access to vaccines. So the poorest countries had to cope with this problem without the resources, again, more affected by climate and now COVID. And now we have this invasion of Ukraine, which is driving up food prices. Ukraine and Russia are the food baskets of the world. And this is affecting African countries in particular. I'm more familiar with that continent than elsewhere, but also other countries that import food. And fuel is going up, and fertilizer is harder to get, it's also going up. So, and the worst thing, Robin, the worst thing is it's distracting us from this crisis. It's distracting us. We're not talking about it. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report at the end of February should be our maximum attention at this conference. It's hardly been mentioned.
No, I think you've captured it absolutely, and well, I'll make a comment at the end, but maybe I'll make it now. I think part of the injustice, as well as the barbarism of Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, is that it's damaging the world, and not just damaging Ukraine and Europe and those around it as well. Miguel Ángel Moratinos, former Spanish Foreign Minister, now Under Secretary General of the UN and Special Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations. I have to say, Miguel, I joked, well, I said to you beforehand, wow, that's quite a title to carry right now, Alliance of Civilizations. And maybe you could just say a word or two. I'm not predetermining what is your biggest worry, but your title must be along with it, because we are looking at a really divided world here. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizer to invite me again. I think I must be one of the few that attend the first Doha Forum 20 years ago, and how much it had changed, how Qatar had changed, how the world had changed. But unfortunately, when we have this kind of panel of discussion, we don't take and we don't extract the lessons of our successes or our failures. And I think it will be good to remind that 20 years ago, we were concerned about 9/11, was the war of terrorism, and then we were trying to introduce the Millennium Goals and the cooperation and the dialogue agenda, and then the security agenda kidnapped us in the UN. This progress in the issue that it had been mentioned by my predecessor. So today, I have two main fears. Before we have had this meeting, before the Ukraine war, I would have said that what concerned me as a UN part of the family, entity of the family, is that, of course, as you say, that we need to have a multilateralism. By the way, the last forum in 2019, multilateralism was the main concern. We were all talking multilateralism, defend multilateralism, we have to implement multilateralism. And there was some administration that was proclaiming unilateralism. Well, the concept paper of today's forum doesn't talk about multilateralism, by the way. But we are talking about multilateralism. So my first fear is, if I was asked before Ukraine, that I don't like multilateralism à la carte, as the French will say. What I mean, that we only gather to discuss climate change. I know it, we are all to save the planet. But we are only going to discuss climate change, or even difficulties, the pandemic with certain difficulties, or maybe migration. But when peace and security are at stake, how we are going to discuss the rest of issue in the agenda. So my second fear is that now, as we have Ukraine war and challenge, we go back to security agenda again. And as my friend Collen said, SDGs are going to be put aside. We are not going to have this discussion. So I refer my answer to my solution. And talking about my mandate, as you say, President Fantino mentioned, of course, and Mary Robinson said, the question of how we relate each other in this one humanity concept, understanding different culture, religion, civilization, how we can promote the human element in our relation should be part of the new agenda. So I stop here, and then I'll give you some answer.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everyone for keeping on time. Zeid, President of the International Peace Institute, former Human Rights Commissioner also at the UN, also an elder. Really, you have been at the heart of the UN process. You're involved in the UN Peacebuilding Commission. You were former permanent representative for Jordan to the UN. So you've seen it from the national perspective, you've seen it from the institution's perspective, but I'm wondering again, what would you put at the top of your list of worries right now? Because we're getting a slightly different perspective. It's unified, but I'm wondering where you would pick your top 2 worries.
Well, thank you, Robin, for setting the stage. I'm also delighted to be back here in Doha and to see so many friends. When I left the UN, I realized I needed every friend I could get. Well, of course, I agree with everything that has been said. The 2 things I worry about the most is what Putin's diabolical action has done to the rules and how we understand the rules, and 2, what he could do to the machinery that allows us to sort problems out. So the first one is the rules. Nuremberg defined the state act of aggression as the supreme international crime. It is the vehicle which opens the way for all the other crimes to take place, all the most egregious of the atrocities. And this is what he has now committed. It is, in a sort of legal sense, a violation of pacta sunt servanda, the sanctity of customary law. Law that's been built over centuries has been ripped apart by a permanent member of the Security Council. It's no small thing, this. It means we have to then begin to think of how we conduct our affairs in the context of this. There's this absurdity where the Russian Federation insists on the rules, the provisional rules of the Security Council to be observed, and yet is prepared to violate this cardinal rule of non-acquisition of territory by force in such a deliberate manner. The second thing I worry about, and actually I'm not sure I should be saying this in public, but you're forcing me, is the sand that could be thrown into the machinery of the international system. We know, for example, at COP, all decisions are taken by consensus. If the Russian Federation disagrees, we have no COP outcome. No COP outcome. No movement on climate change. And that can be said time and again in different fora, right? So everything becomes gummed up, should they choose to go that way. And I worry about the possibility of that happening.
Interesting you raised that. Maybe we can come back to this in your solutions, because it struck me that within the COP process and in COP21, it recognized maybe the limits of international machinery, and you had nationally determined contributions. So I suppose you could have continuing national approaches, even with Russia not involved. But let me just park that thought. Maybe you could say something about how international law and the machinery may need to adapt to a long period when we come back to it. Okay, we've got 20 minutes to go, and I do want to give an opportunity just to take 2 or 3 questions from the floor. So may I ask you to have, your 1 or 2 answers that you would be really pushing for, or are pushing for right now in your respective areas to try to avoid this outcome. Kathy, what's possible from your perspective? Don't forget your microphone.
I don't have a satisfying answer. I think that the only answer really for children is to have peace. I think short of that, what UNICEF works hard for is to try to get children educated, because I think that is at least a way to move children forward in their own countries, to try to make sure they're educated and nourished, but really...
Can I ask you just a follow-up to be specific? Do you think this is a moment where the NGO world, the big global foundations need to step up while some of the governments are distracted? I mean, what are there vehicles to achieve what you just said?
Yes, I think look, if you talk about education in particular, because obviously the peace issue is a government issue, and that is in the hands of a crazy person at the moment. But education is a huge problem. I mean, we're estimating that 70% of children in low-income countries are not able to read, 10-year-olds are not able to read or understand a simple sentence. So that requires the cooperation of huge numbers of people, governments, nonprofits, everyone really, to come together in a collective way to address that problem. But yes, we can move the needle for sure.
And Collen, are there who can pick up the baton for the SDGs if, let's say, the United States and parts of Europe are distracted right now? Is there a community out there that can do it?
Well, there is a community out there. I think you would know that one of the 17 goals is partnerships, goal number 17, that is intended to rally the private sector and other non-governmental players to also fill in the gap, because clearly the SDGs cannot be financed by governments alone. So there are players there. I would say that we need, as Zeid was talking about, the multilateral system. We will need a recommitment to the multilateral system. We will need a recommitment to the pledges that have been made across many important initiatives. The climate agenda is one of those, the commitment to support countries. We know the ODA commitments to least developed countries, the 0.15% to 0.2% for LDCs. We need more engagement. I must already perhaps take this opportunity to say that the ECOSOC system and the season has started already in February, and it's going to be running all the way to July, closing with the high-level political forum, the HLPF, where we are going to hear from 45 countries that will present their voluntary national reviews on how they are doing in terms of implementing the SDGs. We also have, even before that, in April, the Financing for Development Forum, which is coming from the 25th to the 28th. So I would encourage both governments and the private sector to follow through these forums that are upcoming and renew their commitment so that we do not get distracted by the conflict in Ukraine. Yep. Maybe I should add one more, that in acknowledging that Africa is being left behind in many areas, including the vaccines that you spoke about, we have agreed with the President of the General Assembly that we will convene a joint dedicated event on the development of Africa. So I would also want similarly to encourage all of you, all the partners, to be part of that process so we can recommit to multilateralism and the financing of all the commitments that we've made. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Turning to you, Gianni, the way I would phrase the question is, what is the precedent that you think you need to set this year in 2022 for the World Cup? What is the right precedent?
Well, I think this World Cup, which comes, of course, after a pandemic and in the midst of these turbulences that we are living, will be a unique occasion. A unique occasion to unite, try to unite the world. Multilateralism has been mentioned. I was saying we need to again learn to live with each other by respecting each other, by respecting as well some differences which exist, using the positive values that sport can have. Look at what the World Cup has done here in Qatar in terms of workers' rights, for example. Or to stay in the region, in Iran, we are speaking about gender equality. Women are allowed now to go in football stadiums. In Iran, this was not allowed for 40 years. It's maybe a small drop, but it's something important. In Saudi Arabia, there is a women's league as well, women playing football. It's important. It's little messages, but very visible messages. And the World Cup, for the first time in an Arab country, for the first time in the Middle East, in the Gulf, with 1.5 million people coming, 4 billion people watching on TV, will, I think, I'm convinced, and I hope, help to get rid once and for all of some of the prejudice that exists, because we have to mention this also. We are here in the Arab world, prejudice from the Western world, where I come from, towards the Arab world. Well, when people come here, they will see that it's a welcoming country, that you can celebrate, that you can enjoy, that you can be with other people. And we need more of these occasions, like the World Cup, more events to bring men, women, and children together, to help them knowing each other, because this contributes to the education, this contributes to their growth, and this hopefully can contribute to maybe a little bit of of a better world.
Will all those goals, those very noble goals, be undermined if the Russian national team is present?
Well, the Russian national team today, due to a decision taken, is not participating in the World Cup. The Russian Federation has appealed that decision. As I was saying before, I think it's much, much more important today to focus on whatever can be done for peace to happen.
Thank you.
In Ukraine. And then all the rest will come as a follow-up of that.
Thank you very much. Mary, what's on your list?
Well, as we know, it's a cliche now, we mustn't waste a crisis because it also is an opportunity. We have two very serious crises. And the first one is the invasion of Ukraine. And I agree totally with how Zeid has characterized it. It is potentially a crime of aggression. The elders have called for a tribunal and joined with others in calling for a tribunal. We know already that the International Criminal Court is looking at crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and even potentially genocide, and the ICJ has also been seized. We must not be neutral on this. It is wrong if the world fragments between this being the West and Russia. It's not. I have heard a number of people say they are neutral. We should not be neutral on this. I would respectfully plead with this region of the world. Don't let it become the West and Russia and fragment as to who takes sides in this. This is an unacceptable invasion of a democratic country, and it is something that we should all say is not acceptable in any shape or form, and we, not let it be a fragmentation of the kind that I believe that President Putin is seeking and pushing for. That's the first point. On the second crisis, because we're almost out of time, and the young people and children of the world are begging us to listen to the science and understand the crisis we're in, we need a moonshot approach. We put, John F. Kennedy put a man on the moon in a very, very short time. I gather most of the people working in NASA at the time were, the average age was 26. Young talent, young people who were able to have a moonshot approach. That is what we need to shift to what is good for the world. Clean energy, rewilding, regeneration, smart agriculture, all of these things, and out of fossil fuel. I say this in a country and in a region which is, has the riches of fossil fuel. You also have the capacity to move more swiftly, and we must do this, or we will have no safe world.
Thank you very much. Miguel, what's your answer?
Well, it took half a century, 2 world wars, to put the world in order. We are 22 years since we started the century, and everybody said, not only me, that after Ukraine, my clear assessment is that we cannot continue to be in the same institutional framework that we have after 45. The world has changed, the issues are different, the actors are totally in different capacity of influence. We see how the Africans demand legitimately to have a much more say in the UN. We know how indigenous people in America, they want to have their voice. It's not a question against West, but the West have to understand that the world has changed. And it's not the same world. And the UN have to take into account that we cannot continue as business as usual. Of course, Secretary General have launched a very important common agenda. It's a good basis to start, but let's be frank. When a country is presiding over the Security Council and he has the right to veto, how? I mean, I know I'm not politically correct, I'm a part of the system, but we are talking clearly. Because the audience will say this UN official, they don't think, they don't have any, no. So we have to tell the people what is going on, what are the stakes. It's not how we are going to move, how we are going to reform, but the world is going to be different. Are we going to live in between blocks again? No. And that's what the Alliance wants to do, to bridge the difference, the disparity, as Infantino had said, because we are one humanity. And this one humanity have to prevail. And young generation, if we political decision makers don't make the decision, the people on the street will oblige us to make the decision.
Thank you very much. Zeid, you get the last word, and I think we'll have 5 minutes for questions, and then one last 1 minute each from everyone there, please.
Well, I believe we need to emphasize again that the rules are good. The rules are being violated, have been violated consistently for the last 70 years, but they're good rules, and that has to be affirmed. The second point, and here I disagree a little bit with Miguel, but to use the presence of Gianni Infantino with us, I think the way to look at it is in the context of football. And what we need are actually small adjustments. Small adjustments which will prevent a further recurrence of pandemics, which will address conflicts more properly, and which will also help us with climate change. And what I mean by this, we have, in the context of football, a club system where power lies with the owners of the clubs. It lies with the managers, it lies with the star players, and of course it lies with the head of FIFA and the regional football associations. But when the game is played, all power is given to the referee and the linespersons. These are people who are not publicly well known. If you bump into them in the street, you wouldn't know who they are. They're paid average salaries. They ride a bus. They take the subway. But all power is given to them because without them, there is no game. There is no sport. We go back to the way football is played when you're 6 years old in the back of your school and everyone is fouling everyone. The international system has a referee in the form of the Secretary General of the UN. The repository, the organization, is the repository of most of the conventions, most of the big regulations. It's about time that all governments give power to the referee, and the referee asserts that power to preserve the normative framework we have. Otherwise, we will have the continuation of this fragmentation, and we are in great peril. So we need to think of football as a good analogy for how to make adjustments in our world, and how you can have competition when you have collaboration over the rules. You can have competitions on how it's played out. But we don't want competition on the rules itself. And that's where we are now. So we need to reaffirm the rules, we play by the rules, and we have a referee that we listen to.
Thank you. Gianni must be rather pleased with that analogy, a very clear one we can all take. Right, any questions? I'm looking for any hands going up. There's one in the middle. Sorry, one over there starting. Yep. Microphone's coming to you, and then there was a person there. Yep. I think we've got time for 3 probably. Yep, there's a microphone coming to you. Here it comes.
Thank you very much.
Introduce yourself.
This is Christina Petcu, member of the Coalition for the UN We Need. I wanted to make a small comment. I think that, sorry, you're saying
tight.
Further?
Tight.
Tight. Okay. I don't think we need a recommitment to multilateralism or small changes. I think that what we need is actually to transform multilateralism. And in the Doha Forum report, in the background paper that was mentioned, actually this was mentioned in the way forward, in what we need to do. And it was also mentioned that one of the opportunities that we have right now is the Secretary General, our common agendas process. And looking at the ECOSOC president, I'm wondering, what do you see in terms of transformation in the area of economic prosperity, because we haven't done so well thus far in terms of the paradigms that we have used to date. So my question is how we can bring, for instance, international financial institutions, ECOSOC, and bodies such as G20 closer to each other and enhance governance in the economic space. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear, good question. You've got that one, Collen. Right. Yep.
Thank you very much. Dr. Farhan Chak, Qatar University, and also I have an NGO in Canada, Kashmir Civitas. My question is to His Excellency Zeid Hussein and Her Excellency Mary Robinson. We talked a lot about consistency and continuity and about the normative framework that is under threat today. But there are reasons for that threat on this normative system, this framework, in that it's unequally applied. And I think that's one of the major issues confronting us, is that what about Palestine? What about Kashmir? What about Syria? And if we can see solidarity from the world community confronting these issues, you will find the peoples in the Middle East very receptive to the problems elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. There's a lady here, and there was a gentleman there, yeah, with his hand up. And the lady there, just if you could put your hand up so they can see you. Microphone, can we get the microphone to the lady there, please? Otherwise, if the microphone is near the gentleman there, put your hand up, please, sir. Yeah. Okay, the microphone's coming to the lady first, and then there was a gentleman there. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll speak in Arabic if you allow to me, and then they can translate. I have 2 questions, or 3 questions actually. Okay, I'm speaking in English.
There's definitely only time for 1 question and a very quick one. We have 2 minutes left on this panel right here.
This
Could you
question
ask
is
1
for
question in
FIFA.
English? Very short.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
We were talking about that we are transferring to a new word. I'm asking about this word with Israel in Palestinian case. You consider that it will not be participating the World Cup. What about Israel? Especially we're talking that they are killed our brothers. My brothers died by the Israeli army in 2008. What about this case? This is the first question. The second question, please. What about the new generation? While UNICEF, there is no project, there is no new projects in Palestine in general. They made this case, they made a new situation in Palestine with needs. All the time we are needing UNICEF and UN, and the projects right now are so limited. So in this case, what you're going to do in Gaza and Palestine in general for refugees and all people. Thank you.
Thank you. Question heard. Right, gentlemen. Sorry, you had your hand up. That person there. Could you give the microphone to the man there? There. Would you keep your hand up? Yep. Keep your hand up. There. Pass the camera. We're going to go 2 minutes over. I apologize to the minister.
Hello, Mohammed Hassano. I'm from Syria. Actually, I want to ask why we didn't see the reaction in Syria over 10 years. Even though the enemy in Ukraine, it is same in Syria.
Thank you. Very simple question. Right. Panel, I'm going to go in reverse order, because Kathy's always had to take the first one. I think it's a little unfair. In reverse order, you've got literally 30 seconds each. Some of the questions were for you directly. Please.
Well, okay, I'll deal with Farhan and Mohammed's question. Look, moral consistency needs to be applied by everyone, everywhere. It's very easy to point fingers at someone else and what they're doing wrong. It's hard to do it when the person or the community or the country that's doing the wrong is your own. And it's something that all countries need to strive for. And I think what you were saying, Farhan, and of course Mohammed also, is absolutely correct. We all have to be morally consistent. If we condemn the actions of the Syrian government in Syria with respect to Halab or Idlib, or you can take the community destroyed, We have to do the same when it comes to Yemen. We have to do the same when it comes to Libya. We have to do the same when it comes to what the Israelis are doing in the occupied Palestinian territories. We have to be consistent, all of us. And it goes with the conflicts elsewhere. Moral consistency is what gives us integrity. And when we have integrity, we have credibility. When we have credibility, we can get things done. I agree with the two comments made, and they have to be applied by the international community.
Thank you. Actually, if you don't mind, because we're literally time up, I'm going to get Mary. Jenny, if you don't mind, because I think you made good interventions earlier on, and Miguel as well. I'm just going to do Mary, Collen, and Kathy to finish up. Please.
I think I can be very brief because I want to support what Zeid has said and to say that that is the approach of the elders. We condemn double standards and have condemned double standards and want that moral consistency in applying, and at the same time it's not an answer to allowing this terrible invasion in the 21st century of an independent country to become somehow a fracturing. It's the West against and we're not really involved. That opens up, I think, much more problems for our world. So I would plead, but I absolutely take the point about there is far too much double standards. I felt that when I served as High Commissioner. I know that Zeid felt it probably even more because you're from this region. You know, it is true.
Thank you very much. Collen? Quick answer to that.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me say I agree with the speaker's observation that we need transformation of the multilateral system, not just recommitment to it. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think Miguel has pointed some of the imperfections that can be fixed. ECOSOC is going through that transformation actually as we speak. Last June, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 75-290 on strengthening of ECOSOC. But that alone would not be enough. We need other institutions, the Security Council. I was listening to the television this afternoon, one observation saying the UN has been rendered helpless as far as the conflict in Ukraine is concerned. But one thing that is clear, it is not the UN in general, but it is the Security Council that is responsible. Finally, I think you picked on the Secretary General's report on our common agenda. I got the impression that you must have read it, because indeed there is a proposal contained in that report on a biennial summit, which is intended to bring together ECOSOC, the Secretary General himself, the G20, and the international financial institutions. So there's already a proposal under consideration, which I hope the member states would consider favorably.
Thank you, Collen. Kathy, you've got the last word.
I would just respond to the questions by saying that I would not suggest in any way that UNICEF is a perfect organization, but we are always guided by what's best for children. We have worked in Syria and in Palestine for years. We continue to work there, and we're always guided by what's best for children. And I would just say to close that, you know, no country that fails to protect children will ever prosper or succeed. And I would encourage everyone to always think about children when you're doing your work or you're sort of thinking about the future, because if we don't protect them, there really is no future.
Thank you very much, panelists. Look, I think what you've seen from this panel is a deep and profound commitment to the problems and the challenges beyond the crisis in Ukraine and their spillover, and understanding that what has been undertaken, the war that Russia is undertaking against Ukraine, is compounding the problems that existed before. And there's a responsibility that comes with this for all of us. But I think we heard from the questions from the floor and the passion as well that consistency and double standards really undermine the capacity for a truly global response and could create, Mary, your worry about the West versus the rest. So everyone's going to have to work very hard to avoid that from happening. Could you please give a very strong hand to the panel? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you to all of your distinguished guests for this fascinating discussion, which leaves us at least with a promise of what can be achieved if we all live up to the ideals of international law, multilateralism, and the Charter of the United Nations. Thank you all so much. Indeed, we now begin our next and very final session. We move into our close. As we announce, it is my pleasure to announce the arrival of the Prime Minister of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Sheikh Khaled bin Khalifa bin Abdulaziz Al Thani, who will be here with us as we close this special edition of the 20th Annual Doha Forum. Your Excellency Sheikh Khaled bin Khalifa bin Abdulaziz Al Thani, Prime Minister of the State of Qatar, heads of government, heads of state, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. As we come to the end of this 20th annual edition of the Doha Forum, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage for closing remarks an activist, a lawyer, a law professor, a president, the president of Kosovo, which unilaterally became independent, declared independence from Serbia in 2008. She is one of the youngest heads of state in the world. She leads the youngest country in Europe. She is in command since April of last year, in fact, of her country's armed forces as the 5th president of Kosovo. She joins the growing ranks of a new generation of leaders around the world who have taken it upon themselves to really push towards accountability, the rule of law, campaigning for anti-corruption and implementation of economic reforms. It is my privilege to invite to the stage the President of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani.
Dear Prime Minister, Sheikh Khaled bin Khalifa bin Abdulaziz Al Thani, Your Excellencies, members of the Qatari government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be here today and to have the pleasure to address this audience. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Emir of Qatar, His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and the Qatari leadership for hosting this impactful event. And to the teams and the staff that have made this possible, it's been truly amazing. So I want to thank you for your warm welcome, which has been unmatched. This event has been extra special for me, as it marks my first visit to Qatar as the President of the Republic of Kosovo. I am delighted to be with all of you here today. Kosovo may be a small country, but our voice is mighty. And we have an important story to tell. Your Excellencies, I represent a people that know the sacrifice that comes with hardship and the value of freedom and success when it's achieved. Events like the Doha Forum are crucial to have our voice heard, and as a small country to have the opportunity to sit down with all of you as equals to discuss the most pressing and shared challenges we face today. This year's theme, Transforming for a New Era, for the 20th edition of the Doha Forum could not come at a more important time. With endless challenges around the world, it is time to regroup and rethink how do we move forward. And as we recover from the pandemic, and indeed the largest shock to the global economy since the Second World War, we, the policymakers, must find new ways of cooperation and make better use of existing international mechanisms to the benefits of the people we represent. Over the last couple of days, we've heard fascinating speeches and conversation about the most pressing issues from across the world, from climate change to food security and to sustainable economic development. With history constantly being made, new alliances being formed, and in a world where the number of global challenges continue to grow, multilateralism has never been more important. The Doha Forum underscores the significance of dialogue, diplomacy, and diversity, and I am confident that we are all convinced of the importance of engaging with one another and jointly finding the best solutions. And what I hope to contribute here today, however, is the unique perspective of a small but brave nation that I have the privilege of representing, and the role that multilateralism has played in shaping our journey to statehood and freedom, as well as its relevance today. The Republic of Kosovo is the youngest country in Europe, and one of the youngest in the world. It is not so just in terms of its existence, but also we have an incredibly young population where 2/3 of our people are under the age of 35. Kosovo today is peaceful and a peace-loving nation. Kosovo today is vibrant, a democratic country that is thriving precisely because multilateralism worked and the world came to our rescue. Kosovo today is free and independent, and most importantly, it is what its people hoped it would be, because of the resilience and determination of our people, and because countries from all corners of the world, all of you, came together to ensure that we would not perish at the hands of a genocidal regime. As you know, our journey has not been easy, and our success has come through great sacrifice. Our path to freedom and independence was unfortunately a result of a bloody war where untold atrocious crimes were committed against the people of Kosovo, led and fueled by a man known as the Butcher of the Balkans, Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic waged wars across the Balkans, resulting in hundreds of thousands of deaths among civilians, the rape of tens of thousands of people, and the displacement of millions, until he was finally met with a unified response from the international community that put an end to genocide against the people of Kosovo. It was precisely this joint response from the international community through which peace was chosen, democracy was chosen, protection of human rights was chosen, human rights over destruction, over loss of lives, and over genocide. It was the response that our country needed, but it was also the response that the world needed to once more understand the power of coming together and standing up for what is right. It is because of our experience that the people of Kosovo know too well the importance of unity, multilateralism, and diplomacy. 2 decades ago, this united effort paved the way to freedom, and today, 2 decades on, I am proud to say that we have made astonishing progress. Kosovo declared independence in 2008 and has since then joined international bodies and initiatives to ensure that our people and our economy is well connected. We have built bilateral relations with friendly countries from every corner of the globe and strengthened ties with our allies, such as Qatar. Today, we have one of the most advanced democracies in our part of the world. So I am proud to represent a people that lives by and genuinely believes in democratic values. And I am especially proud of the fact that day after day, we are proving to the world that we are ready and able to give back. The Republic of Kosovo was the first country to offer shelter to Afghan refugees. And similarly today, we have proactively offered to do the same for the people of Ukraine. We know the suffering of people around the world. And although a small country, we believe we must all play our part to help. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I represent a people that are not simply content with the significant progress that have been made, but we remain ambitious and confident that Kosovo will secure an even better future. We want our businesses to thrive, our young people to prosper, our sports people and artists to shine brighter, and we want a future as a fully fledged member of the Euro-Atlantic family and the United Nations alongside each and every one of you. I am mentioning the successes of our country with a pronounced emphasis on the multilateral efforts, because unfortunately, many have forgotten the value of it. And in the heart of Europe, in the 21st century, we are yet again witnessing war crimes against innocent people in different parts of the world. The devastating images from Ukraine are a difficult reminder of a dark past for Kosovo. They are a reminder that we must never be indifferent when our values are under threat. In our part of the world, peace and stability have been achieved through great sacrifice, with many innocent lives lost. That is why it is crucial for all of us to come together and condemn Russia's aggression on Ukraine. Otherwise, I fear events will only get worse. These are dark times, but if there is indeed a silver lining, it is that there have been significant efforts to build on the resilience of the international systems, and we have witnessed alliances strengthen in solidarity and working together. As these sad and horrifying events unfold in many parts of the world, our societies and our respective countries are also facing a parallel, yet silent, challenge that poses a significant threat to humanity. Here, I speak of climate change, a common danger that knows no borders and no politics. But fighting it certainly requires a unified and multilateral stance and a bold vision as we move forward. If there is a clear message that we can derive from everything that we are dealing with nowadays, it is the fact that the longer we hold back and hesitate to call things what they truly are, the graver becomes the danger posed by them. It is equally the case with climate change. It has to be clear to everyone, climate change is happening. And it has to be clear to all of us that we need to act immediately. Whether a small or a big country, we can only succeed if we come together. But most importantly, if we help each other out. We are stronger when we are connected, and this forum is a testament to that. The only path forward to ensuring that we can tackle our common challenges that will benefit not only our generation, but our children's livelihoods too, is to work together. Distinguished guests, I want to conclude by saying that if we really want to transform for a new era, we will need to do it hand in hand. I started my speech by telling you about my country, the Republic of Kosovo, and I want to leave you with a reminder of the contribution that you have all made. I stand before you today not just as the President of Kosovo, but also as a former refugee and a survivor of a genocidal war. I am a child of war. It was the conscience of the free world that saved my life and the lives of my fellow citizens. While we were taking shelter from the shelling, I remember listening to important meetings of international fora. We had so much hope that leaders like yourselves would come to our rescue, and you did. Therefore, I hope, as you lead your respective countries and take the big decisions, that you will always be thinking of that child who will be listening to the news, hoping that you will come to the rescue too. I was one of the lucky ones because I survived. Any one of the thousands of children that were brutally murdered in my country could have been standing here today in my place, representing our nation, if their lives had been spared. Therefore, in honor of their memory, it is my moral obligation to urge each and every one of you, on behalf of all the children that have to go through war, hunger, and other kinds of suffering, to never turn a blind eye on their pain, to never turn your back on them. To conclude, Your Excellencies, Qatar is a country that has shown the potential of global leadership and cooperation despite its size, and will be bringing people together again through sports later this year as they host the World Cup. We will all be watching from Kosovo. It is a lesson for all of us that small countries can and should have an impact. In the spirit of togetherness, on behalf of the people of the Republic of Kosovo, I want to extend our hand of friendship and cooperation to each and every one of you. This world is full of so much opportunity, potential, and beauty. We just need to work together to ensure we not only preserve its positives, but ensure they flourish. Thank you all. Shukran.
Thank you very much indeed, President Osmani, for helping us end this forum with a message of hope, of possibility, of what we can do while remaining realistic about the challenges we face if we do work together, if we take collective action and urgent action as well to meet the challenges that we face, to give hope to the millions of children around the world who look to people like you, to the heads of state and government, the heads of international organizations, the policymakers of today and the change makers of tomorrow, to bring real change to their lives. Now, before we close this year's Doha Forum, a forum that took place against the backdrop of one of the most serious crises, if not the most serious crisis since World War II. We're grateful to be back here after a 2-year interruption, to be together, to reflect, to rethink, to transform, to meet the challenges of the future. Here's a quick look at the last 2 days of these productive discussions. And now in closing, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let us hope that wisdom, that diplomacy, that humanity will eventually overtake the spiral of violence, that guns will be silenced, that girls can go to schools, that that crops can be harvested, and that we all work together and lead by example, that climate change can be not just a concern, but one of our main concerns, not only to save the planet and to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, but to save us, each and every one of us, from what can be a man-made self-destruction. Let's hope that we can all play our part, as President Osmani said, that we can all lead by example by emulating some of the initiatives that were taken here at the Doha Forum and by the Doha Forum in its 20th edition, to make this the first carbon-neutral edition, and to vow to neutralize its carbon footprint annually for the next 10 years. Let's hope that every major global conference will do the same. Wishing you all safe travels, and on your behalf, allow me to thank the organizers of the 20th edition of the Doha Forum for bringing us all together once again for the 20th time. We look forward to seeing you all right here again next year. Thank you very much.